the academic conveners of the DIMES project. So I'm just up here right now to introduce DIMES to you, and then I'll hand over to my colleague, Maxine. So DIMES is a Jean Monnet project, an Erasmus project that is a collaboration between UASIS and the European Studies Association of Sub-Saharan Africa. And a Jean Monnet project is one that's funded by the EU. What we've tried to do with this project was to explore the ways in which European studies is diverse and can be more diverse, with particular respect to ethnicity, disciplinary focus, as well as geographical location of participants. And we've done this through a series of events. Most of those events, due to the pandemic, have taken place online. So I'm really pleased that we're here in person, looking people in the eye for our very final conference. Maxine will talk to you a bit about the order of the day and the program, but I'm really pleased to see so many people here today, and I look forward to chatting with you over the next 2 days. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Tony. Just to say thank you to all of you here in the room who could make it, but also to those of you who are online. This is, as hopefully Tony has suggested, a really, really important project, especially for those of us based in Western Europe, where we're having to really kind of tackle our biases, assumptions, and the absences in the teaching and the analysis of European studies. I'm actually an EU-Russia specialist, and there has been an awful lot of soul-searching going on among us over the last year. So we are very, very grateful to the European Commission for the Erasmus Plus funding for this very, very important topic. Just before I go on to just talk about the program and then to introduce our keynote speaker here, for those online, the load shedding here is going to end at 2 p.m. So we're currently on a generator, so there may be a small blip at 2 p.m. as we switch to the main. So just bear with us, please. It should only take a moment or two. Also, for those of you on live stream, we do have somebody monitoring the chat. We will have plenty of time for a Q&A, so please put any questions that you've got into the chat. Could you make them brief, because somebody's going to have to read them out on your behalf, all right? So if you could just hone them a little bit to make that a little bit easier. And what I'll do is I'll take a few questions from the audience here and then come to those of you online and keep switching between you. Right. In a moment, I will introduce our keynote speaker. Just to say as well that we did try to organise a bit of an exhibition of people doing more creative work. I say more creative in terms of different formats of work that would shed some light on the study of the European Union. We have a couple of pieces in person, if you like, and then some online. So I think Emily will come to you after this and talk about that. Tomorrow, we hope that the audience here will stay with us, and for those of you online, we do have a full day, which will be starting with a roundtable on contemporary European studies, looking at crisis, disciplinarity, the shaping of a field. After that, looking at knowledge production and pedagogy and thinking about the lessons for Europe that we should take from that. And I would guess that we'll be talking an awful lot about decolonialism and decentering there. And then we will have a closing session in the late afternoon, reflecting really on the conversations that we've had over the last couple of days, will have had over the last couple of days, and thinking about the meaning of Europe in what is unfortunately an increasingly contested world. Right, back to right now. I am very pleased to introduce Professor Christopher Isike for this important keynote at this concluding event of the DIMES project. Professor Isike is a professor of African politics and international relations in the Department of Political Sciences here at the University of Pretoria. He is also director of the African Center for the Study of the United States at the university here. And to add to his achievements, and no doubt, I should imagine, to his workload, Professor Isike is the current president of the African Association of Political Science and a member of the board of directors of the Global Development Network. That's just a taster of some of the roles that he has. Professor Isike conducts research from an Africanist lens, and he teaches international relations theory, strategic and security studies, and security theory, again here at the university. His research interests are wide, necessarily so, I would argue. They include African soft power politics, women, peace and conflict studies, women and political representation in Africa, the rethinking of state formation in Africa, politics in a digital era, and African immigration in South Africa. In other words, your kind of go-to person for pretty much everything. Rated as a C2 researcher by the National Research Foundation, which is South Africa's researcher rating system. I learned that one from looking at your bio. Professor Isike has over 70 publications in top national and international peer-reviewed journals, including chapters in books that have been published by reputable publishing houses globally. Since 2020, he's been serving as editor-in-chief of Africa's foremost political science journal, Politicon, the South African Journal of Political Studies, and he's also been editor of Ubuntu, the Journal of Conflict and Social Transformation, since 2017. I think that these are really important things to kind of flag in his bio, because it means it speaks to Professor Isike's connection with the academic community at all levels. So established researchers, PhD candidates, early career researchers as well. And to that end, he also serves on the editorial board of several reputable international journals, such as International Political Science, Abstracts, Canadian Journal of African Studies, African Journal of Political Science, and Strategic Review for Southern Africa. So in other words, a huge advocate for the African voice and the study of Africa in international relations generally. In addition to this academic work, Professor Isike consults for the UN Population Fund, for UNICEF, the UN's International Children's Emergency Fund, and I should imagine at the moment an awful lot of conversations going on in UNICEF, UN Women, and also the KwaZulu-Natal provincial government on gender equality and women empowerment issues in South Africa. He is also a social cohesion advocate of South Africa, who was appointed by the Minister of Sports, Arts and Culture, and will be serving in that role until 2024. As you can tell from all of this, we could not have selected a speaker more qualified to speak to these very important themes of the DIMES project. Before we hear from Professor Isike, I'd ask you to join me in thanking him for giving up his time to speak to us today.
Very much. David? Is mic on? Okay. Thank you, Maxine. You know, every time I hear people read my CV, I try not to listen because it's something that I know, right? But today I listened, and nobody has ever read it so well. It's for the first time I really hear what it feels like to hear about myself, and I enjoyed it. Thank you. Right, so thank you, Maxine. Thank you to the head of Department Political Sciences, who I know had something to do with my doing this today. Always giving me more work, but good work. Thank you, Victoria Graham, Professor. I see my colleagues here, my friend Frank, and the Chief Executive Officer, for DIMES, and all of you who are part of the team. I am hoping that I shall be able to address some of the critical questions that this conference seeks to answer with respect to international relations theory, which is what my focus will be on. Questions such as how Eurocentrism persist in international relations theory, how it can be challenged, and how international relations theory may change when it is no longer approached from a Eurocentric perspective. So today I shall be talking on a decolonial approach to teaching and learning international relations theory in Africa. So to give you a context for why a decolonial approach to international relations theory, which I will subsequently start referring to as IRT, is relevant, the study and practice of international relations has its origin in Europe, and its theories have been dominated by European political thoughts since the inception of the modern state system. Now, the state that is assumed here is the nation state with particular traditions of statehood that can be traced back to the emergence of the Westphalian state, which itself is another European creation. Now, both traditional IR theory and the critical prism are generally and predominantly premised on assumptions of Western thinkers about the world and Western norms and values. Claims of idealism and liberalism, for example, assume values and progress conceived from Western vantage points that emerged in particular from the system of ideas, norms, and values and rules of the post-1945 world order. Now, even constructivist theories also derive from European historical experiences that foreground how international realities are historically and socially constructed. Now, while most critics challenge the dominance of Western thoughts in the field and lament the silencing of non-Western thoughts, some also question the applicability of mainstream IR theory to the non-Western world and Africa in particular in international relations. As a result, we have over the years seen some improvement in diversity in the discipline. However, the flow of knowledge has remained one-sided, given the gatekeeping powers of the West. On the other hand, while most scholars both from Africa and the Global South have been calling for new theories, approaches and methods of studying and explaining international relations, not many have given thoughts to what this means in practical terms, especially with regards to teaching methods. And I think that this is useful as the calls for curriculum decolonization and transformation should go beyond merely changing the sources of knowledge and the skin color of those who teach international relations. In my view, how teaching should be done and from what premise should be part of that discussion. And this is where decoloniality comes in. And that's why I've chosen the topic of a decolonial approach, not just to this talk, but to the classes that I teach at the University of Pretoria. Now, to be sure, the concern of decoloniality is delinking former colonial societies and the people who identify with them from colonial matrices of knowledge, power, and being. Decolonizing the coloniality of knowledge, which I will be focusing on out of these three colonialities, interrogates why the West is the epistemic locale from which the world is described, conceptualized, and ranked, according to Maldonado Torres. Therefore, decolonizing knowledge in the African context is working against a mode of knowing Africa through learning, thinking, and explaining Africa, usually through the agency of academic institutions, universities and research centers, epistemic communities, opinion leaders, religious body, and social structures of society, including those of the colonial community which persist. Decolonizing the coloniality of knowledge entails teasing out epistemological issues, politics of knowledge generation, as well as questions of who generates which knowledge and for what purpose. This will involve decolonizing the methodology of knowing away from the empire. In the African context, this means unchaining and demarginalizing global Africa and black movements and ethno-philosophies such as Pan-Africanism as a way of reading, knowing, and doing international relations. It means, as Professor Spamandla Zondi puts it, it means unthinking methodology and positionality in IR and unmasking of coloniality at the heart of epistemological making of IR as a discipline. All right? So my goal here today is to share some knowledge on how I have approached this discourse of decoloniality, of curriculum transformation, of decolonization, in the teaching of my international relation theory classes in the last 3 years at the University of Pretoria. I shall use the postgraduate IRT model as case study and render an account of my teaching practice of the model by looking at content, bibliography, teaching method, assessment, and then end with some notes on what it all means, trying to answer the so what question, what it all means for curriculum transformation and setting a research agenda for international relations theory in Africa. But before then, let me state a standpoint on curriculum transformation and decolonization. So I view curriculum decolonization from the prism of relevance and purpose more than change for the sake of it. So when I talk curriculum decolonization and transformation in Africa, which in itself is a tool of decoloniality, I am talking of how to make the curriculum relevant to Africa's needs and realities. That means decolonization and transformation in this context will entail going beyond changing where knowledge is coming from and who produced it to designing a curriculum that is relevant to Africa's need and development based on African realities. It also means going beyond the curricular design itself to rethinking how the curriculum will be taught. In essence, curriculum transformation is about how we construct knowledge from the rich diversity of sources that shape emerging worldviews in the disciplines that we study, research, and teach to make it work for us. If curriculum change is about learning as a process of conceptual and practical engagements, aligned to context, aligned to ideas, professions, subject matter, location, and life, then it's also about opening up spaces for alternative perspectives to come forth, to embrace dissonant views in diverse ways. This is how I merge diversity of sources of knowledge with relevance for change. So let me now try and focus on my case study to give you an idea of how I have approached and enacted the decolonization and transformation of courses that I've taught at the University of Pretoria. So to give you some kind of background, I resumed as professor in the Department of Political Sciences at the University of Pretoria in January 2018, and I've since then taught, like Maxine said, security and strategic studies, international relations theory, security and strategic theory, but I have actually in the course of this time revamped all these models that I've taught, but I shall focus on just one, international relations theory, IPL 752 as we call it in the department. And I have done this class in the last 3 years with a colleague, Professor Sandy Africa, who is the current Deputy Dean Teaching and Learning in the Faculty of Humanities where we reside. We have also in the last 3 years done this with our teaching assistant, Miss Zainab Olaitan, who is a doctoral student in the Department of Political Sciences. So what was the, this is not the course study guide, this is the exam question. Can you go to the study guide if you can? So let me give you an overview of what the course was like before I took it over. So the IPL 752, International Relations Theory, is a core or if you like, compulsory module for the BA Honours International Relations degree. It builds on undergraduate knowledge of international relations theory and international political economy to undertake an advanced study of IRT, that's international relations theory, to teach students how to apply international relations theory to explain international relations. But just a snapshot of what it was like. The content, when I found it when I started doing it in 2020, the content showed an uncritical engagement with mainstream international relations theories, taking them as a given, as a gospel truth of some sorts. In terms of the bibliography, the sources of knowledge, I found out that 82% of the sources were Western scholars and 16% Global South, with less than 27% of that African. The teaching method was lecturer-centered, the usual lecturers, all-knowing and very hierarchical. So what did I do? I adopted a decolonial approach to teaching the module, the IPL 752, and I've done this between 2020 and 2022. So 3 years, 2020, 21, and 22. Now, to give you an overview of what I've done, some of the things that I've introduced, that is now the course, we have shifted focus from dominant European or Eurocentric theories to explore the silence of theoretical ideas that have been neglected, especially those from the Global South, particularly from Africa, as well as to contribute, to theory building by introducing students to theory building in international relations. The academic content now contains 8 themes, which we designed to occupy students for the semester. The module, unlike the previous, as it was previously, is now student-centered, is research-based, so that students are expected to read on their own and to discuss thoughts and ideas in class. It is a bi-weekly 2-hour class. Now, the outcomes of the module are to achieve, it is as expected, rather, that at the end, that students would have an advanced understanding of international relations theory, ability to undertake a critical analysis of international relations theory and the application in the Global South and Africa particularly, to apply these theoretical insights on practical case studies from the African experience, and more importantly, an ability to build theory that is relevant for explaining international relations. You want to scroll down to just keep going. Page it was keep going. Keep going. You see a table. I think the second table. Keep going. Yeah, this one. Right. So 8 themes. So the class, this was the study guide for last year. We did it in the second semester. Usually it's in the first semester. This year we're doing it in the first semester. So if you, just take it up, remove the introduction part. So those are the themes from the second lecture. We have 8 themes. The first one is a critical assessment of the international relations debates, and we look at the debates themselves, but we also tend to focus on the debates that we have not had, focusing on the Bandung Conference of 1955. And then for the second theme, we haven't acknowledged that Africa is discentered from international relations thinking and theory and practice. We then try to bring back Africa by looking at the theme of recentering Africa. And then the third theme is looking at international relations theory and the Global South. What are the contributions that they make that have not been taken into cognizance, not just flowing from the Bandung Conference alone. And then we go to the fourth theme where we dissect the international in international relations theory. So we try to spotlight the fact that if we say that international relations is a European creation based on European histories, locations, and experiences, and norms and values, how international is that? Is it international, or it's actually provincial? And so we try to dissect that by looking at 3 things. we look at it ontologically, we look at it geopolitically, and then we look at it epistemologically as well. And then in theme 5, we go back to the mainstream IR theories and do a critique of them with a view to, underscoring the need for an alternative. The last guest speaker talked about an alternative subaltern theory. All right? And after that, we go to theories, the theme 6, where we, based on everything we would have done so far, we start harnessing alternative thoughts for building a theory. I would, if I'm able to have time, I will speak to 2 particular assignments out of 4 that we give students to address this particular theme of, harnessing alternative thoughts. What we basically do is to give a wide range of thinkers and thoughts, African thoughts, both from the global south and Africa particularly, and then ask the students to choose whichever thinker they prefer, whose work they're familiar with, and then begin to harness that thinker's thoughts, for theory. And when I speak about the methods, the teaching methods, when we talk about the guest lecturers, I will tell you something about these thinkers as well. And then the last theme is then engaging in alternative theory building itself, where the students, having harnessed potential thoughts for theory building, then go into actually developing a theory of their own. All right. Because when the students do come to class, every semester, the first thing I tell them is that my role as a teacher is to be there, and their responsibility as students is to come to class with their nonsense. Their nonsense, everything. My job is to separate the non from the sense, and to give them back the sense, and then go home with the non. Of course, I don't take it home. I trash the non along the way, but the idea is to encourage students to feel confident, to speak when they're in class, to understand that they are not a tabula rasa. They are not vessels that I'm filling. They are people with experiences, with knowledge that are important, that are critical, and that together we can be in a space where we can co-create knowledge. Not just in an oppositional manner, but in a proactive manner, co-creating knowledge that we feel will be relevant. And then, of course, the last thing, we use some of the theories that they have developed from this class to frame their honors dissertation. So you see how what we do from teaching in class dovetails into what they then do, apart from building theory, believing in those theories and taking them forward. And when I say build theories, it doesn't have to be an innovative theory called the Aquazania water theory of international relations. No. It doesn't have to be new. It can be a convergence of existing theories, so long as you can explain it and make it applicable to what you want to do. So basically, that is the content that we now have. Now, in terms of the bibliography, my approach of seeing and doing decolonization of the curricula from a relevance perspective does not mean the geographical and ontological sources of knowledge are not important. So let me make that very clear. So to be clear, the idea of the international, like I've said in R, is constructed as part of the making of the modern state, and therefore is implicated in the incompleteness of the idea in terms of representativeness. For example, how included are peoples of the South and other margins that modernity necessitated. Who are the nations and the human family that is assumed in theory, international relations theory? We've already said European histories, but we then tend to ask the question, whose histories, whose experiences, social values, and norms are assumed as commonplace and thus common sense? So, as you can tell from these questions, using a decolonial lens, ontologically, the peopling of the international is about an imagined world community, which often is about beings and non-beings, or at best, sub-beings. All right? It is often about reflecting the social heritages of one portion diffused to the rest to copy from. Therefore, to begin to reverse this silencing of non-Western experiences, histories and values and voices, we need to deliberately deliberately start including other sources of knowledge that are based on non-Western realities into international relations thinking and practice. All right? That is why I started a process of incrementally balancing the sources of readings between Western, Global South, and African scholars. So from a less than 20% of Global South sources in 2019, the IPL 752 today now has 75% Global South sources, with African scholars making 50% of that. That's at 2022. In essence, it now has 25% Western sources. And that is useful because it is not helpful to throw away the baby and the dirty bathwater, right? Western knowledge of international relations theory is still relevant to understanding international relations and, in fact, useful to decolonizing it. So we can't throw it away. Now let me talk about the teaching. I've already given you a snippet into my teaching philosophy, but it is actually rooted in critical pedagogy, which unlike mainstream pedagogy sees learning as personal, okay, as situated, as ideological, and as a negotiated process and praxis that allows students to bring in their lived experiences to enable change, right? And that's why I said I don't see them as tabula rasa. This has influenced my Africanist standpoint in using blended methods that enable deep learning through participation and context. Understanding this, my personality as a teacher is reflected in my belief that learning experiences and processes must be critical and reflexive in a manner that helps the student to move from merely comprehending and regurgitating information for exams, to pass exams, to critically thinking through and analyzing such information to enable change. Now, luckily for me, my co-lecturer in this module, Professor Sandy Africa's teaching and learning philosophy also aligns with the critical pedagogic approach, and that is why we have continued to do and teach this module successfully, if my HOD will agree, since 2021. And I'm sure she agrees because she has not changed us in the last 2 years. So basically, we used and we continue to use an inquiry-led and student-led learning approach. That in itself is part of the decoloniality in terms of methods. This approach places learning at the center of the process rather than teaching. Now, learning respects, recognizes, and values the contribution of the learner. All right? It values what the learner brings to the learning environment. It encourages the initiative of the learner to find data, information, knowledge, and to bring them to class. It also stresses the need for learners to collaborate, exchange information, network, and enrich each other with ideas through individual and group presentations that we do in class. We also do debates and role plays, which all carry marks. Now, this non-hierarchical approach enables students to be major contributors of knowledge creation in class, and it is a refreshing departure from the colonial approach of lecturer-centered classes. Now, another element of our teaching method, which I would like to stress, is the use of guest lecturers, and I said this earlier, to teach and to engage with students. Now, 5 of those 8 themes you saw were taught by, are usually taught, in this case, 2022, were taught by guest lecturers for the first hour of the 2 hours classes, and these are not just any guest lecturers, okay? They are mostly scholars whose articles and books we use as reading texts and materials for the class that we do. And these are globally renowned scholars, except for one instance in 2022 where we used an emerging young scholar just for generational balance. And when I say young scholar, she's an academic at the American University in Qatar. But she's young, she's coming up, not exactly like Amitav Acharya, for example, right? She's not an Amitav Acharya. So we've brought Amitav Acharya to our classes. So we bring a combination of top Global South scholars, people with Global South origins, and Western scholars as well. So Amitav Acharya, if you're an international relations person, you would have heard of Andy Knight, you would have heard of Timothy Shaw, You would have heard of Bertrand Badi of University Sciences Po in France. And we've also had globally renowned Africanist historians, political sociologists, and political geographers of African descent. They may be domiciled in the global north, but they are Africans true and true. And I'm talking of people like Toyin Falola. I'm talking about people like Oyerunke Oyewumi. I'm talking about people like Abdi Samata, respectively. Historian, globally renowned historian, political sociologist, and political geographer. Now, these sister disciplines and the works of these scholars are veritable sources of global South and African theories, and they speak to the question of multidisciplinarity. We have also used foreign policy implementers such as ambassadors and presidential advisors on foreign policy such as Kori Shake, who was one of our speakers last semester. Now, apart from interacting closely with such academic giants and policymakers, these varied teaching methods has proved to foster deep learning with many of our students now more inspired to contribute towards alternative theory building in international relations. Am I doing well with time, Maxine?
We're getting towards the end.
Okay.
We brought you here to hear you, so you...
All right. Okay. I want to make sure that there's time for us to have an interaction. So maybe I wouldn't spend too much time about talking about, but to talk about assessment, I think this is important. So we do 8 written assignments that entail individual and group seminar presentations, like I said before. And we have a portfolio of evidence that then becomes the examination paper. So as you will see, if you put up the study guide, we have, out of those 8 assignments, 4 of them are actually abstract submissions. So what we do with that is to pick a seminal article that's relevant to the course and then ask students to summarize it in 600 words. Initially, students resisted that, and that's one of the challenges we faced. They resisted it because they felt it was too much, reading. But then, after the end of the semester, when they graduated and became master students, I got feedback that particular assignment task, the abstract submission, helped them, to engage with material, help them to read better and to prepare, for their masters, and they were better equipped as a result. So those abstract assignments are useful. They will also give, think pieces, reflective pieces. Keep going. Yeah, keep going. You see a table that talks about assessments. So I wanted to just highlight 2 of the assignments we give them. I've already talked about one that relates to theory building, where I say that we give them a list of thinkers, people like Frantz Fanon, Kwame Nkrumah. Yeah, I think this one, yes. Kwame Nkrumah, Leopold Senghor, Amilcar Cabral, Peter Eke, Sabelo, Ndlovu Gacheni, something naming, Aimé Césaire, Ife Amadume, Oyewumi Oyerunke, Toyin Falola, Eric Dussel, Amitav Acharya. All these people, will give them a long list of names of global South scholars and say, pick any one thinker of your choice from this list mentioned above and read their whole archive of articles around international of ideas around theory building. It may not be international relations, maybe sociology, anything. Now, students are then asked to reflect on the ideas of this particular thinker, focusing in simple and clear terms on the key concepts or theories that they have generated. And these may not have to be international relations theory. They will then ask them to explain how this constitutes a contribution to international relations theory. What can you harvest from these ideas that can then be, brought into international relations theory? And then we also ask them to do a criticism of what they have proposed, right? And students come to class and present their ideas, to everyone, and then we discuss them. The other assignments we do is to then, having exposed them to theory making, theory building, creativity and theory building, at the beginning of the class, we then tell them, okay, based on what you have written in the last assignment, which I just talked about, the ideas that you generated, now engage in the actual science and art of building theory. And they do that quite a lot. So those are basically about assessment. In terms of, and I'm running up, please be patient. In terms of the examinations, something I thought I should also talk about is that we have a reflective component in the portfolio of exams. By the way, so out of these 8 assignments, we use 4 of them. We asked them to take the 4 assignments and build them into a portfolio of evidence. Okay, you have an introduction, you have a conclusion, and you have a central organizing argument that binds all 4 assignments together, and that becomes your portfolio of evidence, which you submit as your examination paper. All right? Now, that's the kind of exam that, if you like, you can have all the books in the world in front of you. You can cheat if you want, but let's see how you do cheat, because it requires innovation and creativity. Right? So it's a take-home exam. And this is what we've done with this class since 2020. We've never had a formal exam, COVID or no COVID. That's how we've just done it. And, we've got very good feedback. Now, one aspect of that exam, which I want to talk about, is that we introduce a reflective component. So student feedback has its advantages, but in this module, we went beyond the usual student feedback to include that reflective component that I'm talking about. So in it, we ask students to critically reflect on both the content and substance academic skills that they acquired during the course of the semester. We ask them to reflect on 1, what they have learned, 2, some of the gaps, concerns in the model in terms of content that they would have liked to see or better engage with, or had anticipated to see that they did not see or did not see enough of. All right? And then 3, the skills, we tell them to reflect on the skills that they had before coming into the module, and then the skills that they feel that they have acquired at the end of the module. And then, of course, we also have the last portion where we tell them to tell us, learnings that can be useful for developing the class for those who will take it in future. So this they do in about 500 to 600 words, and they get marks for it. So they really, really take it seriously, and it's part of the exam. Now, what are the challenges that we have faced? Challenges with digitalization. There were initial challenges when we had to migrate to online fully during 2020, 2021. But then since we came back, especially last year, we had to now make it hybrid because of our guest lecturers. Of course, we didn't fly Amitav Acharya from Washington University to come here, American University, sorry. We didn't fly to Infalola. To all these people, we took marginal advantage of some who were visiting, like Oyewumi Oyerunke. She's visiting SEMA scholar at the University of Johannesburg. So we just told her, you're going to do a class for us in April before you go. So those kind of things we do very cheaply, doesn't cost the department anything, but they are here. But then that hybrid format means that we can't have the classes in the any regular classroom. It has to be a class that is equipped, with the right digital tools to be able to have a lecturer who would speak to the students, see them as like this, and interact with them. In fact, I had to take 2 of these classes myself in Perth, in Australia, at 11:30 p.m. to 11:30 to 1:30 p.m. a.m. In the morning, and I had to manage the class from Perth while the students were seated in Pretoria. So for me to be able to do that and see everybody, if anyone was making noise, say, hey, you drop your hands now. For me to be able to do that digitally, it meant that I had to do it in a particular classroom environment. So that was a bit challenging. And then, incorporating students' feedback sometimes was a challenge. Students didn't like the idea of 8 assignments. And so we tried to take that into cognizance, but we couldn't manage that. Some of them feel that they don't hear Professor Isike enough. He's passing the buck to all these guest lecturers that he's bringing from all over the world. They want to hear me more. We try to introduce that, try to be part of the teaching sometimes. But then, I also don't want it to be about me because I'm not a pastor, I tell them. So all of these things we put together, they are quite challenging. There are more challenges, but let me round up by saying, I know that my goal was to share my experiences with you. using a decolonial approach to teach international relations theory. But it would be useful to also try and answer the so what question of what this means, okay, both for the decolonial agenda and for international relations theory. So I'll just share a few learnings that will help set an agenda for Africanizing international relations and a subaltern international relations theory that will not be provincial but truly international, as the name of the discipline implies, right? So the first learning is that one, no single theory can explain international relations fully. And this underscores the need for alternative theory making in the light of the weaknesses of our existing mainstream IRT and the complexities of our world. When I talk about the complexities of our world, I'm talking about weakness politics, Bertrand Badi calls intersocial relations rather than international relations, because since the end of the Cold War, we've had more of social issues, human security issues plaguing the world and even bedeviling so-called powerful nations in ways that made him to ask, is weakness politics triumphing over hard politics? All right? And then secondly, there's a growing school of thought in international relations, which is Africa's international relations, called AIR, defined as scholarship that seeks to center Africa and its diaspora in international relations. And it is decolonial in its objective in terms of seeking to stem the coloniality of knowledge in international relations. Now, this AIR scholarship community started as a defensive, oppositional, or if you like, reactive endeavor, but it has started becoming offensive. And by that I mean that AIR scholars are now beginning to set their own research agendas rather than dissipating energies on defending the legitimacy of focusing on Africa. All right? So that those are the learnings. Now, what are the agenda? They're just four. I'll just read them very quickly. As suggested by Thomas Tieku, he says that Africa international relations scholar can help the Western IR community to gain a deeper understanding of the international system by building on the rich African history to show the dynamic nature of international politics and the international system that existed in Africa prior to 1648 and the formation of the European international system. I see a professor from UNISA who is Nigerian. I happen to have reviewed one of his book where he wrote an article about pre-colonial international relations amongst the Benin Empire in Nigeria. So the idea is that before 1648, there was international relations in Africa. There was international engagement. There was international trade. How were these done? How was even migration conducted? We need to bring all of this into the fore. I'm not saying that we should just, I'm not trying to romanticize it. I'm not saying bring everything. But there must be some point of convergence between what we did before and what we're doing after all. This is the case with mainstream international relations theory. And thank you, Professor, for attending. I know I didn't invite you. Whoever invited you did well, right? And then secondly, he says that Africa's international relations scholars in this field are already exploring and investing IR ideas embedded in indigenous African systems, which is what I've said before, and this is what we have tried to do, or we're doing with IPS 752. Also, AIR scholars can use, according to Teku, multidisciplinary and transdisciplinary approaches to bridge the artificial gap between IR scholarship and other sister disciplines, such as comparative politics, African studies, development studies, sociology, the whole social sciences and humanities in general. And this is one of the things that we are already doing with IPS 752. Lastly, AIR scholars can also build on emerging ideas around relationality and solidarity, to develop theoretical frameworks that can capture the nuances of not just African international relations, but global relations in general. This is how to understand the growing trend of African common positions that explains Africa's international relations behavior in the global arena. Let me stop here and hope that there will be time enough for further engagements. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do you want to continue standing, or would you like to sit? I'm going to be lazy and sit.
Okay, so let me be like you since you're sitting.
Okay, thank you very much. So we have about half an hour for questions and conversation. So should I start with anybody in the room, please? Yes. Oh, yes, I think there's a microphone coming to you. And if you could just introduce yourself for those who do not know you.
Hello, my name's Nick Smith. I'm from the University of Canterbury in New Zealand. Thank you very much, Professor Isike. What I particularly liked was how practical you were in your focus, and in the past when I've tried to adopt different pedagogies, and I've never done anything as radical as this, I often find students are quite resistant to new ways of learning, and they're almost kind of imprisoned by the Western way of thinking.
About the classroom, two small questions. The one would be, weirdly enough, I've seen that some of these alternative practices are possible because of the more neoliberal university that allows us to have small classrooms. So I wanted to hear your thoughts on how we can think about doing these interactive, student-centered approaches when we have massive classrooms, or maybe also undergraduate, because often it's only postgraduate when, in the UK, it's when students pay a lot of money that they have access to these decolonial approaches, which is quite ironic. You have to be part probably of a certain elite to even be able to do that. The other one would be about the makeup of your classroom. Context of South Africa is a clear example of maybe very divergent population of people in your classroom, but also for me in the UK, we have students from all over the world. So it's even difficult to say I teach this from either European positionality, or I have students from China or India that say, like, really interesting, how you focus on the West, but so what about us? But also, again, very different backgrounds in terms of ethnicity, but also in terms of social and economic background. So how do you, how do we manage that actually, or do we have to manage it? And if you had challenges there. And I guess my last point comes to the very last bit that you said in terms of the fourth point of the agenda, relationality and solidarity. Because it speaks to the purpose of something even like IR theory. If we keep theory and if we keep disciplines, but let's say that we do for now. I find it challenging sometimes to actually understand, once we know the genealogy of many of our disciplines, they were at the service of control, mastery, domination, whatever. And so the first step often is to say, okay, we Africans, we're also part of this, so include us. But then, as you say, the purpose of IR should not be domination or mastery. And so I was wondering whether you feel tensions there, right? Like they need to be included so that we tell another story, but how to make sure that we don't stop at not addressing mastery. That is also obviously part of our African identities or practices. That's it, thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. Should we just take one more question?
Thank you very much for the inspiring talk. My question, rather thinking, right? Cognitive thinking. I mean, sorry, I thought everyone knew me. Başak Alpan from Middle East Technical University, Ankara, Turkey. My first question is rather something that I've been thinking about for some time. I mean, you said that you've included like 60% in your syllabus from the African scholars. My question would be, does including scholars from Africa or from Turkey or from Global South really guarantee challenging the existing knowledge production patterns if they are reproducing the already existing mainstream theories? So, I mean, how do you overcome this question, including more people from periphery or focusing on more critical perspectives? My second question, I think I missed that part. You talked about challenging the idea of relevance, if I took it right. So can you elaborate a bit more on this? Because I really found this quite useful. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think if we answer these, and then we'll go for a second round, beginning with online. Do we know if there are any online yet? But
I'll go for that
we'll
one.
be finding out in the meantime. So some excellent questions there. I may not have time to ask my own.
Okay, I've got mine. Sorry. Thank you. So the first question, thank you for your questions. How do you get students buying? Or did I face resistance? Yes, I did. In fact, my very first class at the University of Pretoria, after 2 weeks, I got reported to the deanery. So the students said I was, they accused me of all kinds of things, right, basically. So the problem was, so the dean asked, so what is the problem? First of all, they didn't go through the reporting channels of reporting to the lecturer first. If he fails to deal with it, then you escalate to the course coordinator. Fails to deal with it, you take to the head of department, and then this was straight to the dean. And they wrote things and said things like, we know you want to transform, but you can't just bring anybody from some university and then just bring them, they transport their values to UP. This is UP, we have rights, blah, 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 all kinds of things. So the issue was, I don't stand in front of a class and just teach. I move around, and then I ask students to go stand in class and talk, right? Ask questions. And I ask questions and you're not answering. I noticed that they were not reading the material. So I said, okay, I'll share you into groups and, force you to read the materials by ensuring that I can come to class the next day, and I will choose anybody from any group to come to class and present. If you fail to present, the entire group loses marks. First of all, they had never done that before. And then the idea of getting them to, come stand in front of class was strange. And these were third-year students. So they didn't like it. Instead of telling me they didn't like it, they reported me as arrogant, as brash. And then the dean said, okay, what is the specific, what are the specific issues around being arrogant, being disrespectful to you as a student? And they couldn't name anything. They just said, the only thing I heard was there's a way he comes across. All right? So, anyway, I told them that, the thing is that you are not used to a black guy, a very dark one for that matter, standing in front of you, predominantly white students. If you've seen them before, you've seen the docile ones. I am not going to be docile, because I told all the students in my class, first of all, I'm richer than all of you. Financially, there's no student who's richer than me. If you are richer than me because your father was a minister, your father was a rich man, I'm talking about you. Is there any student in this class who has made more money in life than me? Nobody. Is anyone older than me? I know there are some usually old students. None at that time. So, does any of you have a master's degree? No. PhD? No. So I'm more educated than you. So if I'm more educated than you, older than you, and richer than you, on what basis do you want me to stand in front of you and begin to kowtow to you? Who the hell are you? Now, I asked this in a nice way, but they got the message, right? They got the message. So that was the initial resistance to change. And the change was asking us to go and read, asking us to come stand in front of class, and asking us to present. This is not something that we know. It's not there in the study guide. It's not been told us before. So we have rights, and we're not going to do it. And I asked the dean, I'll answer this question. Am I here as a lecturer to teach students to become good citizens of South Africa and the world, or we are to see the students as clients? Whatever you tell me, I will do. And he paused and said, that's a trap question. I said, yes, it is. No, we are here to teach students to be good citizens. So it means that the students are not clients who are, they are kings. Whatever they say goes, right? It means that we must discipline them, we must teach them, we must prepare them to be good citizens. If that is the case, then they must listen. And I went back to the students to say, And interestingly, it's not just white students that reported, there are also black ones among them. And they were complaining about how, they wanted decolonization. And I said to them, you can't want decolonization without Africanization. And Africanization means that in African culture, for example, you respect people who are ahead of you. So you cannot say you want decolonization, but you don't want Africanization. You can't pick and choose. So you must decide what you really want. And that's how I was able to navigate it. So it's a direct talk to them to really face the issues and to make them understand. There were still those who resisted. But by the second year, when they all graduated from the undergraduate class into the honors class the next year, then they started writing me commendation letters, same students, to say that thank you for preparing us, because no one told us that when we go into the honors class, there was not going to be a lecturer teaching us as we've always known. It was going to be us making presentations. And so if you had not prepared us in the third year for these, we would have wasted a semester learning how to speak in front of our students before engaging with the material. So that was one practical way that I tried to handle that kind of resistance. So you have, if you are sure about what you're doing, principled about it, then you can do it. I thought I recognized you, Olivia.
Sorry, can I we're going to have to be a bit quicker on the answering of the questions, please.
All right. I will not elaborate as I did in this one. But I thought I knew. I'm referring to her because I tried to ask her to be a guest lecturer from one of my classes. The students complained in 2020 that the first set of guest lecturers were all male. And I said, oh, wow. So I started looking for females. And then I saw Olivia in a conference in 2021, and I wrote her, and she declined. Right. So now she has promised that she will come. So it means that we'll get her in our class. And Olivia is a very critical scholar, young scholar, emerging scholar, not actually established in my view, who has done a lot. So you'll be giants when you come to that class. So how did you do it with numbers? It's innovation. We actually, this class is taught twice at the undergraduate level and at the postgraduate. At the undergraduate level, we had about 300 students in class. It's just introductory. But what I tried to do was to be innovative, try to get them to participate. Like I said, not, sharing them into groups, doing assessment, doing role plays in class, make the class interesting. Not so many assessments, because then it's difficult to manage. So I agree that can be a problem. But there are innovative ways of doing assessments, of doing classroom teaching engagements involving the students that can help to bridge the challenge of having so many students in class. Makeup, how do you deal with focusing on Africa? In teaching something like this, you have to be very deliberate. Okay, Robert Cox says all theory is made by someone for someone, right? So I tell my students by saying, we are in Africa. It is wrong that we teach political science in Africa, but we don't teach corruption as a course in itself. Corruption is the biggest problem of African politics, but we don't teach it. So what kind of political science are we teaching? So I start there and then telling them that if that is the case, do you agree with me? Yes. If you agree with me, then it's not right to teach international relations in Africa without focusing on Africa. Do you agree? They say, yeah, of course we agree. And then that reduces the tensions that can come from, multiple, place people from different places, diverse people from different places, and challenge it. And Pretoria is a global university, I can assure you. We have the same kind of problems even though we're in Africa. To your last question, I think that the whole principle of Ubuntu helps to answer that question. Because when we talk about solidarity, even my attempt to try and Africanize soft power was met with resistance. People said, but power is power. It's always domineering. But in Africa, we had a worldview that may have used power, but the question would be power for what purpose? All right? We believed in the communal greater good. And so once you begin to frame things like that, and COVID-19 has helped to underscore the point of the interconnectedness of the world. And so the idea of solidarity, relativism then becomes important. What is the point of so critical versus geography? It's the idea. It's not just the geography. And I said before that for me it matters less where the knowledge is coming from. It's more about relevance. So what do we want to do? And that's where the criticality comes in. So those scholars that I mentioned from both Global South and Africa, were not just taken because their names sounded black or looked like black. They were taken because of the kind of contributions that they were making to what we wanted to achieve. So criticality trumped over geography.
You had a second part to that question, I think, about the relevance.
Yeah, but I think
That's the answer to that. Olivia, was your question fully answered about the international classroom? Yep. Okay. Are there? I don't think there are any questions online. Are there more questions? I have questions, but I won't abuse my position unless there aren't any more questions.
Hello. I thank you, Prof, for the very insightful presentation. My name is Edwin Hlase. I'm from the same department as Prof. My question is on the broader agenda of decolonization. I'm glad you mentioned it. It might be a bit off from the approach that you were talking about, but what I wanted to ask was, in your engagement with your associate and colleagues, I just want to find out, what do you think about the role of language in the decolonization approach, or in the neocolonialism? Because I take it that the decolonization approach wants to dismantle all the remnants of colonization, which is now in neocolonialism. Because when I think about the role of language, for me, it's something that I think we cannot really say that we have achieved decolonization if in Africa, for example, it's still impossible for an African child to become a doctor or an engineer or a professor without first having to master the language of the former colonizers, especially in the sub-Saharan African countries. It's still impossible. And it's one thing that I think I agree with. In South Africa, there's a group called AfriForum, which is fighting to preserve the language as a learning language, not only in the primary, but also in higher learning institutions. And I stand with them. So for me, I think language plays one of the major roles as an instrument of continuing neocolonialism. So I just want to find out from you, sir, what do you think about, the role of language? Thank you.
Just because we have to project for the online audience, if you could use this, please.
Thanks, Prof. My name is Mopedi Moshweshwe. I come from the University of Witwatersrand, Department of International Relations there. Prof, decolonization of knowledge in Africa's IR. My question is quite basic, really. Starting from this, I will put it as follows: that can we really decolonize knowledge in Africa's IR without decolonizing the actual practice of international relations itself? And from that position, from that question, I will proceed maybe to add that isn't the scholarly exercise of decolonizing IR not running the risk of remaining just an academic, elitist, but nice exercise on its own that may remain with little to no impact at all when it comes to the actual practice of international relations, of how international relations is done, including intra and inter-African international IR itself? I would like to get your ideas around this one, Prof, because often scholars, we are accused of running this elitist project that hardly bears any resemblance or relevance to our actual circumstances, maybe. Thank you, sir.
Well, good luck with those very easy questions. Just as a little lead-in and to smooth your path on the first one, I am British. I teach in the Netherlands at a Dutch university. I teach in English, but the Dutch government is asking lots of questions about whether or not, what the impact is on the Dutch people of so many of their higher education courses being in English, and is that affecting the kind of the level of Dutch that their own people speak. So in this case, English, the Dutch are seeing as being, you know, the same way that you're saying. So I think that there are levels to this, and I think it's a really, really important question. I know where I stand on it, but that's very easy for me in the context of, you know, the British-Dutch one. But I think that this is a really, really important question in this context, in the context where we are here.
Oh, sorry, I keep forgetting. All right, thank you. Yeah, so let me start with her, just and you know, just to try and answer you in this very nutshell, and his question actually kind of helped to answer yours in terms of what do we mean by relevance. His last statement about, you know, is this just an academic exercise? Wouldn't it be so if we don't connect it with our realities? If I take the example of, you know, teaching political science in Africa without teaching corruption, the effects of corruption as a course in itself, it doesn't mean that will stop corruption, but I think that making people aware of the consequence of corruption and their own agency in curbing it can be useful starting points, you know, to deal with the problem. So I don't think that I will talk about decolonizing political science without making it relevant to our lived realities. You know, so that's how I would just simply answer that and leave it there. The role of language, yes, my position, you are lucky, you are not going to be able to tell us your position. So I will say mine, is that language is important. It is important. I believe strongly that if our children were taught in their local languages, they would do much, much better in terms of, you know, results, right? So I would support that becomes the language policy. First language becomes medium of instruction. If we have a policy like that, I would support it. But then I'm also aware that there is nothing wrong in also learning English or French, depending on where you are, right? Why? Yesterday, 2 days ago, I was speaking to one of the professors in our department. We're talking about the fighting in Parliament and how people have said, well, it's normal to fight in Parliament. Even in the US, even in Britain, they fight in Parliament. And my response was, okay, so why can't Africa set a good example? Why do we always have to follow bad examples? Why have we accepted that whatever someone else does is correct, right? So if the world has benefited from using first languages to learn and they are good at it, it doesn't mean that we can't learn with both, all right? Because if you look at countries like China today, they started this first home language policy as a medium of learning, but today what are the Chinese doing? The Chinese are importing people from Africa to come and teach their children English. Why? Because they recognize that you can be a citizen, you can be a national citizen and a global citizen, and that because it is a language of engagement, you need to learn that language, but you do not need to learn, and you don't need to use it as a pedagogic medium. You can teach your children in the local languages so long as you have developed the language and the syntax. I've always told my colleagues who are in the linguistics, how are you a department in a university for 50 years and you've not been able to develop a language policy? I mean, it's not a language, but a language that we can use to learn. You know, it's like us in political science who have not developed any theory of corruption, right? So it's about the purpose. Why are we academics? Are we academics because we want to make a difference, or are we academics because that's the only job that's available?
Ivory towered conversations that make us feel good, but what's the practical effect out there in the world?
Yeah, so I think that as academics, again going back to us, the question is how dynamic are we in understanding our role as academics, right? You write this fancy article, you publish it in a high-powered journal, and then it ends there. Your ideas are not known to the ordinary person. Our promotion criteria says that you must publish in a high-impact factor journal without looking at the impact on your immediate community. How are you a political scientist if you're not able to develop a theory of local politics, the politics of alliance formation in South Africa? What kind of political scientists are we if we cannot solve the alliance politics question in South Africa, but we can talk about big things that happen elsewhere in the world? So is the whole university thing, and I've always said it, that much as we look to universities to really transform and change everything, we should also not forget that the university is a subset of a larger state system, the role of the state. And it brings me to the last comment I'll make on this. The role of the state is critical, that we will be wasting our time doing all these things, like you said, academic exercise. If we don't engage with the question of the state, how the whole idea of the state in Africa, what was the purpose? Why was the African state formed? Why have we accepted it uncritically? Why are we not researching into the question of how to rethink the state? Because the Westphalian state that we inherited was not designed, was not established as a development machine. It was established as an exploitation machine. The state in Europe was established as a development machine. And that establishment, that purpose, also produces an ethos of governance, which is developmental. The one in Africa that was established as an exploitation machine also comes with a governance ethos which is parasitic. That's how to understand why our leaders get into power, loot, marry more wives, and generally misbehave, because they don't understand the purpose of the state and the purpose of governance itself. In West Africa, our leaders, when they win elections, they go to church to do thanksgiving, to thank God for winning an election. Whereas if you understood governance, if you saw Obama in 2008 and you saw him again in 2012, you will understand what governance is about. Somebody saw me in December and said, between December and February, you've grayed a bit more. I said, that's the result of being director of the African Center for the Study of the United States. Made me old overnight. If you are really doing the work, but if you are not doing the work, if you are busy attending parties, marrying young girls, then of course you look young as always. So until we understand the purpose of the state and rethink it and redesign it, our international relations is not going to change. So let's not put the responsibility only on the universities. And we have, as lecturers, we have to connect with society in ways that will enable that kind of change that we want.
Just to kind of wrap this up, but also to connect to, is there one question on? I think but thank you. So sorry to the person online, just came a little bit late. I was checking regularly when taking the questions. But just to kind of connect this final bit, I think really to the DIMES project as well. I think with all seriousness that this point about how universities are connected to society, that part of our job has got to be about educating students in a way, not only about the subject-specific knowledge and about the skills that they will need for employment, but also getting them to think about what it means to be a good citizen as well. And also to recognise that some of our students will go on to have influential places in the institutions that matter. And therefore, these are not ivory-towered conversations at all. But I completely agree. It depends on how you were taught and having that conversation with students. We cannot just be transmission belts for knowledge. We really have to engage in dialogue and conversation. And we also have to recognise, and perhaps you do this far better here than we do in Europe, thinking about inclusivity. The classroom is very different today than how it was 40 years ago. Right? We have got students who are first in their family to go to university. They don't have all of the best equipment. They're having to work second jobs and everything else. But the fact that they are there, they are doing the hard graft, means that we also have got to work a lot harder, I think, as well, to understand their lives and everything else and teach in a way that is really meaningful for them. So I personally get very, very annoyed with colleagues who see teaching as something that they have to do rather than the place where actually we have most impact. This is where, who do we think reads most of the articles that we write? It's the students, right? This is our real engagement. And yet, how often do we write? How often do editors, and maybe this is something for you to ask yourself and your fellow editors as well, how often are you, as an editor, asking, well, who is actually reading this, right? Is this article written for the 5 academics who will read it, or is it written for the thousands of students over the years? I really struggled when I was editing for JASA for getting some scholars to realise this, right? Who really is your audience? You can still do deep, thoughtful work, but you can write it in a way that actually engages students and helps them really understand what is going on. So that would be kind of part of our mission, I think, as well, in the DIMES project. Thank you. I'm just so you know, I am going to torture you with questions that I didn't have the time to ask here, so run if you don't want those. But thank you so much. Really, you've been speaking very much the language of the DIMES project, and it's so good to hear, and you know, lots of food for thought for me to take back to Europe and to kind of our conversations in our own department. So for a last time, could we please just thank Professor Isike?
Thank you.